this is the point that concerns me is like the with inflation, especially of just like day to day goods. Um, Feels like the people at the bottom are going to be the ones who are struggling as a result of the economy that we're currently in, and then the yeah the rise in things like food bank use and stuff. Like it makes me concerned, and I don't understand sometimes why that's not a concern for governments. Because like once there's too many people with nothing to lose, then that's when governments topple
Yeah.
at the ballot box or in a more extreme form. But I don't think we're going to see that in Britain. We're all too apathetic. But do you think that do you think the governments give any thought to that idea, or is the idea that they could be ousted very rapidly not really on their radar as a result of people just feeling desperate?
Well, I think they probably realise they're going to get kicked out next election, regardless. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know what politicians think, and I don't know how cynical they are. Um, but you could, if they were very cynical, they might say, "Well, these are people who are never going to vote for us anyway, and a lot of them don't vote to start with. So let's look after the people who are the, Worcester woman and Mondeo man and what have you."
Yeah, yeah, you could well be right. So like, what would you identify as the biggest like issue with the British economy then? If it's not this the inequality that a lot on the left are screaming about, like what do you think the biggest problem we have at the minute is?
Well, I mean, the biggest problem right now, obviously, is inflation. I think structurally, certainly for the last 15 years or so, the problem has been debt, low interest rates, um, money printing. I've got my fan on. Can you hear that? Shall I turn it off?
No, it's all good.
It's okay.
Welcome,
I've
my
just got
friend.
my heater on to try and get you warm. Um, yeah, I mean, structurally, and it's not just Britain, but most of the Western world has been living in a kind of an illusion of debt fueled. I was going to say prosperity. It hasn't even been prosperity. It's been debt fueled sort of clinging on, and we keep on borrowing and printing more and more money on the basis it's going to stimulate the economy, and it clearly hasn't stimulated the economy. And the latest bout of money printing during COVID has led to very high inflation all over the place. And so the chickens have come home to roost on that one. I mean, anyone who thought that not just us, but the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve could get away with printing the unbelievable eye-watering sums of money that it has done without leading to inflation, is very foolish. So I'd like to think people have at least learned that lesson. I don't think they've even learned that, because everyone seems to go, "Oh, well, this is just gas prices. It's just the war in Ukraine," which obviously haven't helped and have exacerbated it. But as have the lockdowns and the supply side problems, the supply chain problems associated with that. But no, overwhelmingly, it's the money printing. So all this borrowing is now very predictably led to high interest payments. The era of cheap money was always an illusion. We're always going to have to not pay it back, but pay the interest on it. And so now the government's looking at, it's over £100 billion this year, just on servicing the debt. So yeah, we got a high debt, now high inflation for the time being, low productivity, low growth economy, and we would have so fewer problems if we just had decent growth. This is why, although Liz Truss was a complete disaster and she didn't have any real policies, the basic premise that the only choice here is to go for growth was absolutely true, because people aren't going to put up with public spending cuts and they're not really going to put up with higher taxes. So the only thing you can do is grow the economy. And if you've got the economy growing at 3 or 4%, all the other problems fade away. The doctors and the nurses can have their pay rises. We can spend more money on this, more money on that. But we just haven't had that kind of growth. It's shocking how flat, overall the economy's been since 2008, and wages similarly. It's been more than a lost decade. And I don't put that down to, austerity or the Tories per se. I think it's due to a lot of things. But one of them is the era. I really think the era of low interest rates, if it does die, it would be a good thing. I think the interest rates have caused so many problems people aren't aware of, and it's had a real drain on productivity, There's a very good book by Edward Chancellor about this called The Price of Time. But yeah, low interest rates have been a real curse. They have not done what they were supposed to do, which is stimulate the economy. They've actually done the opposite.
Mm. Like, I've been looking and I've been talking about this as well. I'm looking at the way, yeah, the central bankers and economists and financial journalists of the world have were just. It seems like they were blindsided by this idea that printing an insane amount of money would cause inflation, right? And I, to this day, get furious every time I see it happen because, like, I remember my 15-year-old history lessons about the Weimar Republic. Like,
Yeah.
I remember it, and it's like, how are these people getting paid like far larger sums of money to look after, or delineate the monetary policy of our nation and critique it and write about it and discuss it? Like, how have all of them had such levels of hubris that they can both have ignored this idea that it was even, like, the idea it was even possible that this might happen as a result, and then to just sort of wash their hands of the policy essentially, or not even just move on as if they had no contribution to this whatsoever. Like, do you think there'll be any like day of reckoning for
No, not
for this
really. In fact,
policy?
I think it's more likely than not that they'll lower interest rates at the first sign of inflation coming down and try and get the show back on the road. There's too many people completely reliant now on low interest rates. You've got anyone who's bought a house in the last few years, for a start, doesn't want interest rates to go up. A lot of people should never have been given mortgages, in my opinion, because it seems like they're completely incapable of paying back the money if interest rates are anything like historic norms. And there are masses of businesses that are hugely over leveraged. They've been engaging in mergers. These companies are not particularly profitable, but they can just about pay their interest payments, if not their debt, because interest rates are low. You start putting interest rates up to 5 or 6%, which would be really the minimum they would be if you were serious about tackling inflation. And suddenly people can't afford to pay their mortgages. Businesses can't afford to pay their interest payments. The businesses go out of business. People lose their jobs. People lose their houses. There's a house price crash. In actual fact, that's really what the economy needs. If we were being, really objective about it, we need ineffective, unprofitable businesses to go bust so that the people who work for them can go work for a more profitable and dynamic business. We need a house price crash because house prices are insanely high and a whole generation is priced out of buying them. But these things obviously come with short-term pain for a lot of people. And one of the characteristics of the economy of the last 15 years is nobody wants to take any short-term pain. And so every time there's any kind of problem, and we've had some big problems. We had the financial crisis, which was massive. We had COVID, which was massive. But we've had other things along the way. Did we really need to start printing loads of money just because of the Brexit vote? Yeah, I mean, markets were shaken a bit by the Brexit vote, but I mean, did we really need to have a massive stimulus package just to deal, not even with leaving the EU, just with the vote, So it became very quickly, because inflation didn't come about after the initial bout of quantitative easing in 2009, people started getting complacent. Like you say, they got complacent and they started thinking, well, maybe this time's different. And they convinced themselves that the various reasons. They were particularly inspired by Japan, which has been in this kind of deflationary slump for decades and seems to print money almost with immunity. They convinced themselves that we were just in a deflationary period. Imports from China were keeping prices down. And the classic mistake was made of, this is going to go on forever. This is a new paradigm. Things have changed. We can rip up the economics textbooks. And of course you can't. These things always come to a terrible end. But I do think they will probably try and get the low interest, high borrowing show back on the road, because so many people depend on it, including really the government in a way. The government can't afford to be spending £250 billion on debt interest payments, which is what they could be looking at if we can't, if we have high interest rates.
Yeah, well, yeah, that would cripple them in yeah, probably a matter of weeks. The what you're saying is I think probably almost inevitably true, that there is like this crash coming from somewhere. Like, it's like a big bubble that's been blown up and up and up and up and up, and it, like there is no way to slowly let the air out of it. In a lot of senses.
Well, there is, and unfortunately, that's the trouble. There is, because so long as you keep borrowing money, you can keep the economy on life support.
Oh yeah,
And there hasn't really been a crowd. Okay, we had obviously the massive drop in GDP during COVID, but we haven't had a proper recession since 2008, 2009. And recessions are not not a thoroughly bad thing. There is such a thing as creative destruction, and recessions do come along periodically. There is such a thing as a business cycle, and although they're very painful, they do have the effect of killing off unproductive businesses and allowing new ones to prosper. And we've stopped that happening. It's a bit like when you prevent forest fires from happening. Forest fires are actually a natural event, and they are required to stop forests getting too overgrown. And when mankind comes in there and stops them happening, then you just end up with a bigger forest fire. And you think eventually, when everybody completely runs out of the ability to borrow money, then I guess that crash will happen. But you can prolong things for a very long time. There's a lot of ruin in the nation. And with this system of quantitative easing and endless borrowing, you can put off the inevitable for I don't know how many years. I don't think we're going to see a full-blown crash in the next year for various reasons. The stock market is nearly at a record high, which is insane. I just think somehow we'll keep staggering on. I think we're looking at just a slow, horrible decline rather than a cataclysmic, recession from which we could actually emerge fairly well.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.